Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's coffee hour organized by the Development, Mentorship, and Advancement Committee. My name is Chiranjeet Kaur, and I'm a research fellow at Harvard Medical School, Massa India, Boston. And my research focuses on human auditory neuroscience, we assess human cochlear sections and correlate them with the clinical histories to uncover cellular basis of hearing loss and aging and disease. I'll be moderating today's session along with my colleague Rania Sharaf, who is going to give her brief introduction here.
Hello, hi everybody. My name is Rania Sharaf and I'm a PhD student at University at Buffalo in the Communication Disorder and Science department. My research focus on gene expression, cochlear profiling on mice and recently with rats. And we're focusing on Alzheimer's disease and gene profiling. It's it's a pleasure for me to be here and to co-moderate this session. And it's a true honor to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Anna Chambers is an instructor of otolaryngology, head and neck surgery at Harvard Medical School and a researcher in the Eaton Peabody Lab at Mass Eye and Ear. Her research focuses on the neural circuit involved in sleep-wake control and sound-evoked awakening in mice, using advanced imaging, and electrophysiology techniques. Dr. Anna completed her PhD in the same department in 2015, followed by postdoctoral work in Germany and Norway, before returning to the Eaton Peabody Lab in 2023. Her talk today is titled From the US to Europe and Back Again, Navigating Funding at the International, National, and Institutional level as a postdoc. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Chambers.
Thank you very much, Rania, and thank you to the organizers for putting this event together. I'm really excited to share and hopefully connect with some of you. I'm going to start by sharing my slides. Okay. And as Rania mentioned, my talk is going to be about navigating different levels of international, national, local, institutional funding for the purposes of mobility as a postdoc. And typically we think of mobility as kind of going from the place you're from to a new place. But in my case, I think that mobility really encompasses a lot more than that. I really want to try and talk about my experiences to demonstrate how broad the definition of mobility really is, how many funding opportunities there are within that, and how mobility in my case actually meant returning back home as well, using some international funding opportunities. So I have some, just a small number of slides to kind of guide the conversation, but feel free to interrupt me at any point. And I also include my email address here because as with everything in funding, I think the best thing is just to talk to people and get some tips and hear the stories about what they've done. And that's usually the best way to learn how to navigate funding. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. So first, just a little bit about my background. As we mentioned already, I did my PhD here at Harvard Medical School and completed it back in 2015, which seems like ancient history now. But afterward, I first did a postdoc in Germany, in Mainz, which is close to Frankfurt. It's in that area. And I was there for about 1 year before I moved on to Oslo in Norway. And I stayed in Norway for a total of about 7 years, where I did a postdoc, a sort of full postdoc, and transitioned to a junior group leader with independent funding and led a small research group before eventually returning back to the same department where I did my PhD, except this time as faculty in 2023. So over this sort of span of about 8 years, I had been continuously funded independently during that time through fellowships and other external sources, and eventually the PI of a grant, rather than being paid off of someone else's grant. And so it was a lot of work, but also a really great lesson in how to sort of hustle and apply for funding and find different funding opportunities to fund this sort of circular journey. And, throughout that time, maybe 5 to 10 years ago, whenever I was going from the US to Europe, I often got questions of like, oh, why would you do that? It's so often the other way around, where people from Europe go to the US and then come back. I doubt, because of the times we were in, that people would necessarily get that question right now. I think actually I've been hearing that a lot of people in the US, given all the uncertainty and chaos this year, have been considering maybe moving abroad, considering options, for example, in Europe or Asia or other places. And so it's an interesting time to be kind of discussing these things. Some of the things that I've experienced might be a little bit outdated, but actually a lot of the funding opportunities that I participated in are still active and still out there. So feel free to ask questions about that anytime. So I mentioned that I had been funded through different international sort of mobility opportunities. So just to describe what those were, my first postdoc that was a sort of short 1-year stay was in Germany, and there I was funded by an EMBO long-term fellowship. Long-term is relative. It was like a 2-year fellowship, but they called it a long-term, and I completed 1 year of that. And I was also funded through another postdoc fellowship that was local. It was institutional. It was provided through the university and the department that I was in. And in the case of the EMBO fellowship, I applied after I got the position, but before I moved. And the other fellowship, it was right after I arrived in Germany that I applied for it. And in Norway, I was funded by the European Research Council through the Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowship. I'll talk a little bit more detail about that one just as an example case, which later sort of led to me applying for national funding from the Research Council of Norway through something called the Young Research Talents Grant, which is kind of like a starting grant or early stage investigator type of grant that funds a sort of person transitioning from postdoc to faculty to start their own research group. And some smaller pieces of funding that I used during that time to fund collaborations, travel, including my own travel back to the US to sort of establish my research line here, were first an internal internationalization grant to bring someone from Paris to Oslo to sort of teach me a technique that I didn't know how to do. And then a sort of add-on to the Young Research Talents Grant, which provided about $25,000 for myself to travel anywhere. And I ended up coming back to the US and establishing a research line here, and then eventually applying for a faculty position after I'd done that. So from a funding perspective, well, first of all, there's a question of why move, why consider mobility? It's not an easy thing to move as a scientist, but it's obviously a very highly valued to gain more of a diversity of perspective and also techniques and concepts from moving from one place to another. But there's also, always many reasons to move. People might be interested in experiencing different cultures, but strictly from a funding perspective, I want to start out first by talking about one reason not to move, and that would be just the idea that it's easier to get funding or a job somewhere else. And that's something that I hear a lot. In Europe, people often say, oh, it's better over there. And here in the US, people say, oh, it's better over there. And both are true and both are untrue. I think spending a good deal of time in both places, there's positives and negatives in different countries and different regions. And so I wish I could tell you that there is some place out there, whether in the US or Europe or elsewhere, where funding is flowing freely and there's faculty positions that are abundant. It's just not true. And if it seems like it's true, it's probably just that you don't have the information. And so I think this idea of like that there's some place that it's easier to some extent, that might be true in some ways, but I think it's good to have a healthy dose of kind of perspective about that. And rather just see mobility as an opportunity to get to know different funding environments and to open yourself to opportunities that you might not have otherwise. And just to learn how to piece together this lifestyle of seeking external funding, and learning how to actually feel comfortable with seeking funding opportunities and feel comfortable writing grants and applying for them. Like that's kind of the point of the whole deal. And everyone will have their own personal reasons for mobility. In my case, I grew up moving very often, including to other countries. And my husband is Norwegian, and that certainly made a difference in where I chose to go. And so, like I mentioned before, mobility is something that is highly valued in a lot of other places. And that encompasses both moving across institutions, but also across borders. And if you are willing to move and open to kind of trying a new place in a new field, there just are more funding opportunities usually available to you than there might be to local scientists. Usually, if you are someone who's coming from a different place, you're not going to be necessarily limited in terms of any of the funding that you can apply for nationally, locally. You can apply for all the same things, and you'll have other opportunities that are specifically open to you because you're not from there or you're new. And ultimately, more opportunities is really important because it's just statistics. We have to get lucky. And the more times that you apply for something and find something, you just get more opportunities to maybe get that lucky break and end up with a funded proposal on top of all the hard work that you have to do. So on that note, just to kind of point out the sort of broad definitions of mobility that different fellowships can have, I want to use the Marie Curie postdoc fellowship as an example. So this is a fellowship that has where there's two types. One is a European fellowship, which encompasses mobility to Europe from another place in the world. And mobility between European countries, which actually applied to me, although I am not an EU citizen. I was moving from Germany to Norway. So Norway is not in the EU, but it's within the countries that participate in the Marie Curie actions. So the second case applied to me. And there's also a global fellowship, which is where EU nationals or longtime residents, you don't necessarily have to be a citizen, can be funded to move outside of Europe in some beginning phase of the fellowship and then actually come back to the EU for a final phase. And in both of those cases, these fellowships can also sponsor short-term research stays anywhere in the world. And so, when you're thinking about mobility, it can be even to fund a research stay in the place where you are from, or a place that you've never been to, and certainly a place that you're not a citizen of. Usually these things don't really matter. So I really urge everyone who is thinking about going abroad and applying for labs in different countries to be sort of broad and creative in your ideas of what mobility means, and make sure that you're understanding what category you belong to and what opportunities are actually available to you. So in terms of finding opportunities, I would say that as a postdoc, usually your best resource is going to depend on what type of opportunity you're talking about. So these international opportunities like the Marie Curie, the EMBO, the HFSP program, these are pretty well-known international programs that you can find a lot of information about online. Most PIs will know about them. If you contact them for an interest for a position, you might mention your eligibility and see if they're willing to develop a proposal with you. Sometimes they would be willing to sponsor you no matter what, whether you got it or not. And sometimes maybe your employment with them might be contingent on getting some type of fellowship. But I think approaching PIs as a sort of postdoc candidate and mentioning that you already know what kinds of fellowships that you're eligible for. That's very attractive for PIs, obviously, and it just shows that you are sort of knowledgeable enough to drive that process yourself. Often institutes have dedicated funding offices to even help you write your proposal or give you feedback on your proposal. I found that that was true in Europe, especially for EU-based funding. It was very attractive for these universities. And so they would have dedicated staff that were, their whole job was to help postdocs develop these applications. So take advantage of the resources that you have. For national funding, if you're going, from the outside and kind of entering a funding environment where you might apply for grants, the sort of standard grants within the country that you move to, your PI is probably your best resources because it's probably the source of most of their funding. And in terms of institutional and local funding, often whichever department you're in will send out, for example, emails about funding opportunities that comes from an external funding office. And it's usually someone's job, again, to sort of compile all these different philanthropic or these small travel grants or these other opportunities together, and they can be a great resource to talk to. So talk to people, and also make sure to read the sort of back material or the funding sections of papers and presentations to see what are other people using, especially people at your same career stage. So eligibility, I would say, is sometimes the most confusing aspect of applying for fellowships and grants. Citizenship for mobility grants and fellowships is usually not a factor. Sometimes if it is a factor, it's usually working in your benefit. For example, if you have citizenship in a country that doesn't have a lot of research infrastructure, maybe you could get an opportunity to have government funding for a project that you do entirely in a different country and could maybe sponsor you to come back. But generally, I haven't seen that citizenship is something that's taken into consideration. It's more about where are you now, how long have you been there, and where are you going? So this can be relevant to your institute, or it can also be in sort of related to which country you're in. And typically, mobility is given kind of a specific definition for each fellowship. So, for example, I think for the Marie Curie Fellowship, mobility is defined as like you're trying to go somewhere that you have spent fewer than 12 out of the previous 36 months. So when you think about it, that could be a place that you are from and you have spent most of your career. You just haven't been there for more than 12 of the previous 36 months. And technically, you may be eligible for a mobility fellowship. So that's how you can kind of stagger your applications to these fellowships with actually your acceptance of positions. So for example, I did not apply for that fellowship until after I had already moved to Norway, but it was within the first year. Timing is a big thing. So usually at the postdoc stage, pre-faculty stage, there will be some kind of requirement of how many years from your PhD. That can mean your defense, or that can mean the date that your degree was conferred. It's really important because sometimes there's as much as half a year or more between those two dates. So you should always read the fine print and figure out exactly what they mean when they say from PhD. And it's usually about 7 to 10 years, which seems like a really long time. But sometimes when you're trying to string multiple funding opportunities together and they all have the same eligibility window, there's this question of like, what would I apply to first? Would there be enough time to then, still make the window to apply for the second thing? And sometimes your literal age is a factor. There are some fellowships and grants. I think at the time that I applied for the Young Research Talents Grant in Norway, there was an age cap of 40. Generally, I've found that age is maybe more commonly a factor in European grants and fellowships than you often see in the US, but maybe that's changed recently. And there's always exceptions to criteria, particularly for any type of leave, whether that's parental leave, sick leave, or any kind of personal leave. And the rules on this vary a lot. So, that can be anywhere from having a standard extension for your eligibility status for each child if you're a parent, or perhaps it's only the specific months that you are on leave. And so I wouldn't make any assumptions when it comes to that. Sometimes you can get a year or more of an extension, even if you were not on parental leave for that long. And so that's always a reason where there may be an exception to the different criteria. So in preparing applications, I know that, this preparing grants and funding proposals has been the topic of discussion previously. So all I will say here is that for, particularly for mobility fellowships, you may not be very familiar with that funding environment, that funder, what exactly that they're looking for. So it's always really important to try to find successful examples, which you can get by asking your local grant office, their external funding office, your PI and their networks to find people who have recently been successful in getting this funding. And also to share your own application with other people if you succeed. And the reason why I say that is that every country, every sort of funding agency is going to have a particular style, a language, a structure that they are going to prefer or is going to be more likely to be successful. It may not be something that you've done before or been exposed to before. And it's really important to carefully read the instructions. I know that sounds kind of condescending, but the reason why I say that is that if you understand your audience, what level of expertise they're going to have, and most importantly, understand the elements of the proposal that are going to be scored versus other elements that are not going to be taken into consideration. So, for example, something that I had learned about the Marie Curie Fellowship was that people often focus mostly on the scientific component, the experimental plan. And for many other types of proposals, for example, in the NIH structure, for the most part, that is a section that is scored. But for the Marie Curie proposal, there were other sort of more planning or administrative sections that were also scored. And a lot of people kind of lost points by not spending enough time on those admin sections, whereas maybe the advice for an NIH RON grant would be that, actually you don't necessarily need to focus so much on those because they're not impacting your score. So it really depends on the specific case. Don't sort of lose points in areas where you could have stood out more, and just really understand the specific funding opportunity. The award itself, this is something that, going back to the question of feeling like maybe funding environments and lifestyles and sort of the scientific career ladder, it's better abroad. That can seem the case if you see that another country might have a much higher pay rate. The salary might be better, the benefits might be better, the pay lines and percentiles for grants might be better. But this is something that can vary a lot across countries in a way that is not very intuitive. So if you are successful and are able to get an award, I think it's really important to understand what that award means. So mobility fellowships like Marie Curie, EMBO, and different things have different pay rates for different regions and countries that set their own standards in terms of cost of living and salary. Each country and institute has its own protocol. So generally you will receive some sort of living stipend, but you don't necessarily know whether it's going to be taxed. And this can make a big impact on the amount that you receive per month and what your expenses are going to be. So for example, when I had an EMBO fellowship, I learned that that was not considered sort of taxable salary in Germany. So I received the stipend to my own account. However, I also had to pay for my own health insurance, which turned out could be very expensive. And so, it's not all just about the sort of pay rate. You have to understand, how the institute and the country sort of deals with that award and how it impacts you. When I was living in Germany, the Marie Curie Fellowship actually was not enough to cover all the costs of labor and social insurance in Norway. So I ended up not being able to use a travel or equipment allowance because there just wasn't enough funding from the Marie Curie Fellowship to do that. So, so every situation is going to be unique. And And the final point on that is just to remember that funding is a form of leverage. And so especially if your department and your institution finds that award particularly attractive and there's some indirect costs that may be covered, that might give you the opportunity to have some leverage to ask for institutional support and resources that you otherwise might not get. And so finally, the last thing I want to talk about, I'm not sure how I'm doing with time, but feel free to cut me off if I'm going too long, is how to sort of use mobility to go back home. So in my case, I had a sort of junior group leader position in Norway, and I was interested in returning to the US at some point. And so within that, that grant, there was a sort of non-competitive add-on of about $25,000 that would be able to support a sort of exchange for less than a year, maybe half a year, to whichever country of choice. And all that was needed was to submit a research plan and have it approved. It wasn't really sort of peer reviewed or scrutinized. It was just you had to have a plan and you had to have a partner and a mentor and a host in the country that you chose. And so that was something that was only available to current grant holders of that particular grant. But a lot of times, you know, maybe people don't really have any particular reason to plan a collaboration or go abroad, and so they might not have used that supplement. But I would say definitely don't leave money on the table if there's an opportunity to get an additional package of funding for collaborations and travel. Because you are a grant holder or fellowship holder, definitely investigate what are the different creative ways you could use that. And on that note, it's always good to plan for the future. So I would recommend, you know, about 2 years out from the end of your mobility fellowship, considering all of the complications of moving internationally, it's important to start planning early. Sometimes the fellowship is only for 2 years. So as soon as you get the grant, you need to start planning the next step. So it's a long process with a lot of moving parts, especially if you have a family, but I think it can be really rewarding and a good opportunity to practice applying for lots of different types of fellowships and get comfortable with that process. So I'd like to kind of open up to any questions. If there are any, please feel free to contact me if you want to discuss anything else about these opportunities, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Chambers. That was a wonderful and a very insightful talk. Just to remind everyone, we will take questions after both the talks. And our next speaker is Dr. Philippe Vincent. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce him. Dr. Vincent is an assistant professor in the Department of Otolaryngology, Head and Neck Surgery at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. His laboratory investigates molecular mechanisms regulating auditory synaptic transmission and ribber synapse regeneration to advance treatments for hearing loss. His talk is entitled Navigating International Funding Opportunities, Insights from an RNID Funded Project. Help me in welcoming Dr. Vincent.
Hi, thank you very much for the introduction. I would like to thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to work today about navigating funding opportunities. I'm going to start sharing my slides. So I think I took this presentation as a more practical way, meaning that I'm going to use my experience in the RNID, in my RNID project to tell you how it worked for me and how we could apply what the application process, and hopefully it's going to be helpful for you. And first, I would like to introduce myself. Is my background. I got my PhD in 2015 in cellular biology and physiopathology from the University of Bordeaux. And then I moved to Baltimore to Johns Hopkins in 2016, and I did my postdoc in Dr. Elizabeth Glowacki's lab. And then I was promoted research associate still at Johns Hopkins. And last year in September, I was promoted assistant professor and I opened my lab. And my current research projects are focusing on two main topics. First is cochlear ribbon synapse transmission, and I specifically focus on how the brainstem via the efferent lateral fibers can contribute to controlling the synthetic properties of rebound synapses. And the second topic is how one can regenerate both hair cells and rebound synapse so that after nose trauma, we can repair or regenerate new synapses and make the system work again. And we like to advertise that I am looking for postdocs that would have experience in patch clamping. So if you know anyone that would be interested, please email me. My email is on the first slide. And yeah, so through my short career, I got several grants, and actually I was able to come in the US thanks to, like Anna said, thanks to an EMBO long-term fellowship that lasted for 22 months. Actually, you can get up to 2 years, but I got 22 months. And if you ask me why, I cannot tell you. It's just 22 months. And through the different years here, I was able to apply to different foundations, either local, US-based or international. So I was able to get an emerging research grant, then an American Otology Society grant, a research grant from them. And most recently, I got an RNID grant, and I would like to talk to you about my experience with them. And I also have a pending grant application through the American Hearing Research Foundation. So first, you may ask why you should looking for international grants and what it does matter. So here are some insights. I would say that those type of grants could also be great for your CV. I mean, if you talk to your promotion committee or to your senior PIs here, they may recommend you to get some of those grants. And so for your promotion later on, it could be a great asset. Also, it's great because it allows you to establish or to continue international collaborations. I know that most of the grants, but part of them, are meant to initiate and to emphasize collaboration inside the same country, but usually even across continents. So between Europe, for example, and US, the human frontier, for example, emphasizes a lot. So it's really important for collaborations. Also, it's if you decide to, like I would do, like to move back from US to abroad or back to Europe, some of those fellowships and I mean some of those foundation offers fellowships and installation grants that allows you to start your lab and to become really independent. So it's a great also opportunity for that. Of course, it increases also your visibility abroad and increase your network. And because of the current timing in the US, you may find less NIH funding opportunities. And so you have to look elsewhere. You can start local foundation, as I said, AOS Foundation, for example, but also abroad, they offer this kind of opportunities. But I have to say that it's not because you start applying to those foundations that the success rate will be higher. They are roughly similar. They end between 8 and 30%, depending on the research mechanism or the funding scheme you choose. But it's just that you can apply to multiple grants. This is gonna increase the success of getting foundation of getting funds. And also, I know that sometimes NIH, for example, they like work as waves, meaning that they will fund some specific topics rather than others. And if you find out that what your research interest is and it doesn't really fit NIH research scope at this moment, you may decide to look elsewhere. And also, if you need to fill some gaps between your grants, your NIH grant, for example, it could be also a good opportunity for that. And of course, when you submit your grant proposal to international funding agencies, it's going to likely end into different reviewer panels. If you look at NIH website, most of the NIH research, most of the reviewer panels at NIH are based in the US. They are not European, or they are European but work here, so they may have a different culture since they live here. So it's good also to expose your own research to a different panel and see how it's going to be welcomed. And it's what I did, actually. This is the reason why I did that. Second question is, where should you start looking to find those opportunities? I would say go to websites. There is multiple websites around the world that will tell you about funding opportunities. There's RNIDs, Human Frontier, EMBO. There's also this CIHR, which is a Canadian foundation. There's DFG, and some other. There's the European Commission, as Anna said, Mercury, that also is also very helpful. I would also suggest to subscribe to newsletters. If those agencies offer newsletters, they will likely put their call inside, so you're gonna know when to apply, and so you just keep on track, and you don't miss an opportunity to apply for those fundings. You can also use, as Anna said, use institutional grant office or newsletters. They may know, of course, it's going to be likely more national-wise, but maybe they have some networking, can tell you about some opportunity abroad. Talk to your PI also, they may have insight. For example, my Dr. Lowatsky, she's German and she still has some connections. So she also knows sometimes the best opportunities outside US. And I cannot emphasize more the importance of networking at conferences, societies, and workshops. It's really important to discuss with our peers. They have their own experience. They can guide you. Most of my colleagues, for example, are from France, so they can also keep me posted about opportunities. So ARO, SFN, the inner ear biology is also a great opportunity to learn about those funding mechanisms. And for example, RNID, 2 years ago, sponsored the IEB in London. So it was also a great opportunity to get to know about RNID. And of course, the biology of the inner ear workshop is also a great opportunity because it brings multiple researchers from multiple countries. And it's also how you get to know about those funding opportunities. So before even thinking about applying to a specific mechanism, you have to make sure that your research topic fits the research scope of what you are looking at. So first, does your research align with the foundation mission? And are you and your institution eligible to apply, meaning that as they're looking for early career researchers, as they're looking for institutions that are based on a different country. So those are important considerations before even starting to apply. Also, do they require international collaborators, or where is located the host lab? So for example, Human Frontier will emphasize a lot this international collaboration. So you have to make sure that one of the applying PI is based in Europe. Otherwise, it's not going to work. You want to assess whether the funding scale, I mean, how many years, how much money you get, would fit your timeline, and what are the reporting expectations, what kind of, the progress reports, the funding reports, what they also ask. It's also important. And I would even also repeat that, ask for other applicants about their experience. If you know that one of your colleagues applied for this research grant or for this fellowship and he has good or even bad experience, you may learn a lot about it. So it's very important. It's also how I knew that for the RNID, sometimes they will retain some intellectual properties rights on discovery and patents. So you have to make sure that you are good with that. And you have to make sure that your institution will accept their terms and conditions even before starting. So you don't want to waste your time starting an application that can take weeks to put together and realize at the end that it was a waste. So just make sure that you fit and your institution at the end will accept the contract. So why did I choose to apply for RNID? I actually started by a fail. My application did not pass NIH R21 section for several reasons. So I asked myself, so I had two choices. Either I would just take each point that reviewers mentioned and I'm gonna just address that and submit for the next cycle. Or I also ask myself, should I just look for a different mechanism? So here it's like a balance, it's your personal judgment. And of course you can get help from your from your PI at this moment, what is the best choice? What's going to be more beneficial for you at your career stage? So in my case, after judging and after reading all through those comments, I decided, okay, I will not even try to argue or to address those questions. So I decided to look for another research mechanism. And I found that RNID was a perfect match for what I was trying to do. It was about regeneration of inner ear ribbon synapses. And I started looking at it, especially the Discovery Research Grants scheme. And I found that I was eligible and I was fitting all the criteria for this type of research grants. So I just decided, okay, I will just go for it and give a try. And what was also very beneficial is that this type of application is very similar to an NIH format. So you don't have to like redo everything again. You just copy and paste, make some slight adjustments according to what they ask you for. They may have some specific requests, especially RNID. It's more tuned towards the patient, toward more translational research. So you have to make sure that your research plan is also geared to this to what RNID is looking for. So to tell you a bit about RNID Foundation, as I just said, they mainly support translational research, but it's not like applied research in a sense that they still accept a research proposal that is molecular based, like basic research to understand molecular mechanism, like for how to prevent hearing loss or even to cure tinnitus. And they also have this program, Restore Hearing, that is aimed at improving medical devices, so hearing aids or cochlear implants, or even drug or gene delivery. So it's really a large scope that was, for me, very interesting. And because my research interest is to prevent hearing loss, to protect your hearing, I found that this so RNID was a great match for me. And so RNID has different schemes for funding. The first one is what they call the translational grants to, I said, it's aimed at developing novel therapeutics to clearly identify some therapeutics commercial potentials. And also you have to outline that after those 3 years of funding, you'll be able to get other funding. This is really important. And what is also important is that any applicant from any countries can apply. You don't have to be based in UK or in Europe in general to benefit from it. This is a 3-year award, and it's £300, so it's roughly $400,000, which is a great amount of money for 3 years. And the next cycle is early 2026. And I wanted to mention the success rate because you may ask, okay, that's great to apply for abroad, but would my chance be higher compared to here? And actually, here it's about roughly 15%. This is numbers from 2023. So I would say it's roughly an R21 kind of application. So it's quite great, but the number of applicants is not huge. So I found this scheme is really interesting. So for my experience, I applied to the Discovery Research Grants, because it's focusing on molecular mechanisms to develop treatment for hearing loss and tinnitus. And so it also allows to improve ways of testing and developing treatments. And also it allows research to improve already available medical devices. So if your interest is to work on cochlear implants, for example, to make it better, to make it to make it better work, it's also a great opportunity. And again, you can be from anywhere around the world to apply that. The only requirement here is that you must not be a permanent employee. So meaning that non-tenure track position only. So for me, because now I am an assistant professor, I would not be allowed to apply for these grants. But when I applied for it, I was still a research associate, which is considered here as a non-permanent position. I was able to apply. And I would also, if you have any questions, if you have any doubt, I would highly advised to contact the agency if you have any specific questions. They are very helpful. In my case, I was in touch several times with them, and they were very helpful in navigating the application process. You get roughly 225,000 pounds. They increase the money compared to at my time by 25,000 pounds, and the success rate is roughly 8%. So it's quite low, but it's doable. And besides research grants, they also have fellowships, PhD, postdoc fellowship, and studentship. So postdoc is really meant to it's like a starting grant. I mean, it helps researchers that want to move back to UK or establish a lab in UK to start their lab, and they give you money for 3 years. And once again, you should not be a permanent employee at the time you apply. It's important. And also, they are very interesting in bringing new students into the hearing field. So they promote PhD studentship to help students to start their PhD and to get so that they can get interested into hearing. So the eligibility is master's degree students that desire to make a PhD degree in the hearing research field. But you need to be based in UK University of Research Institute to be able to subscribe to this studentship. And so the success rate for the postdoc fellowship, I cannot tell you, I couldn't find any numbers, but for the studentship, it's roughly 30%. So it's quite high. And they also provide you some innovation seed funds. So if you have any idea that you would like to develop that are high risk, you have no clue if it's going to work or not, they give you money for that. So I would highly encourage you, if you have any idea, to just apply. It's you should not neglect any small money. I mean, any money is not small. Any small money is still money. So I would just highly encourage you to apply to any scheme, any funding mechanism, if you could. So if you look at the application timeline, this was for 2025, but you can copy and paste for 2026. So you have to send a letter of intent where you describe your research question, your hypothesis, how this research question is relevant for the funding mechanism you apply to. You have to give some background, some preliminary data, and give your aims, methods, and expected outcome. And usually it fits 2 A4 pages. And so once you do that, you get some feedback from the reviewer panel. And it's great because it helps you to get a sense about the chance of your application. For my example, I was told that my research was over ambitious. So I had to tone down my full application. So I knew beforehand how to change my application to increase the chance to get funded. So it's really important to take those comments into consideration. So there you will receive an invitation to submit a full application a few months after. And after it went through a review process, you're gonna receive, like an NIH grant, you're gonna receive reviewer comments, and you have the chance to address those comments even before decisions are made. So it gives you an extra chance to defend your proposal, to make it better, so that increase the chance for your project to be funded. So I found this very, very intelligent and great to increase the chance to be funded. So all this application process is done online on their what they call Flexi Grants portal. Here it's an example. It's a screenshot from my own portal that is for the full application. So you have different tabs. You have to fill information in your information, collaborators, project details. I will go over that in the next slide. Funding requests. So if you know about NIH, how to write a budget, it's roughly similar. You have to fill a table, write some write a budget justification. So it's really, really similar. So if your PI has also experience with, is likely has experience with NIH grants, it won't get lost. I mean, it's really very similar. You have to also tell about your animal research, whether it implies animal use or not. And also what I learned is that your method of anesthesia needs to match the UK regulation. So for example, anesthetizing animals with isoflurane is not something recognized by the UK research regulation. So you have to, so they will tell you that you have to comply with those regulations and some other topic. And you have also to give the association a contact name, which is usually your grant officer that will sign off on the contracts that you're gonna receive. So the project details, I already tell you, is it's mainly based on an NIH research proposal. You have to give your project title, your lay summary, which is very similar to a specific aim page. Write your research question, emphasize short-term and long-term outcome. So as I said, NID, it's more tuned to patients. So you have to give like some clinical outputs of your possible research. You have to give a scientific abstract, which is like a project summary, research environment, and your research proposal, which is 5,000 words. And you have to get preliminary data. They really rely, so the decision of the research, of the review panel rely on feasibility. So if they judge that your research is highly unlikely to give results, they will just not consider it. So preliminary data are really, really important. So it's really, so as I say, it's done online. You have those text box to fill in, lay summary, research questions, outcomes, scientific abstract, and everything is really well detailed. So it takes you basically by the end and by your hand and just tell you what to do. And you have to like load your research proposal as a single PDF. And again, you have everything listed. So it's really, really well done. So let's say you got lucky, you've been awarded. So you have to coordinate early with your grant officer. He will tell you what are the specifics. First, they will sign off on the contract, hopefully. Then they will give you some specifics like currency change. You may not think about this, but I mean, they send UK pounds, you use dollars. And when I check my budget, they withdraw money from my direct costs because of currency changes fees. So it's important to check that. And also this foundation do not support indirect costs. So this also needs to be considered. It also happens sometimes that you have to use the money that you budgetized toward another purpose. Like for example, I had money that I wanted to use for animal costs. I would highly recommend to contact them before even try to use this money for another purpose. They are usually the answer is yes, but you want to make sure that it's like you get granted before you do any changes to your funds. I would say that you have to maintain open communication with the agency with them and stuff. And at RNID, they are very, very nice, and they give you answer very rapidly. And so you want to know what needs to be reported and when. Usually it's for the RNID and the discovery research grant, it's usually a 1-year report, budget plus progress report. And it's really a free form on a Word file. So for the budget report, you're gonna receive an Excel sheet that your administrators can fill for all your expenses. And you're gonna have your progress reports to write on a Word document. There is no specifics about this. There is no page limits. You just write what you want to tell them. There is no really, guidelines for that. So I talked to you about the RNID fund mechanism. You have also other opportunities like EMBO. The EMBO, so they offer fellowships, they offer exchange grants. So if you have if you want to travel outside, to travel abroad for a few months and learn some new techniques, they support those travels through this scientific exchange grants. As I said before, they have installation grants. So if you want to start your lab in Europe, they will give you money for 3 years as a starting package. And so it's very helpful. Also, the Human Frontier is a great program. They offer different type of postdoc fellowship, either long-term or what they call cross-disciplinary fellowship. So if you know a PhD that want to join your lab and is not really in the hearing field or in the life science field, you can apply to this type of grants of fellowships to like join the hearing field. So I find it's very great funding mechanism. And they also have research grant programs that are also very helpful, like early career team. So that's going to emphasize early career teams and multidisciplinary approach to address specific questions. And it's emphasized specifically that that the teams must be like located at different places, even across continents is even better. So as a take-home message, I would say that you have to identify grant mechanisms that fit your research. You have to check eligibility even before starting and identify whether your host institution will accept the contract that you made with those foundations. You have to start early, as we know that paperwork takes time. So this advice is not just for international grant, it's for any grant, national-wise, international is for any grant. So applying for international grant is great because it allows you to build collaborations or continue collaborations. I would really encourage you to be realistic in terms of research timeline, not to be over ambitious or not enough ambitious, but you have to find the right balance. I found that for like Americans tends to be too ambitious when they propose a grant. This is a personal opinion. So I think European, like I am, because I'm French, are more like realistic in terms of timeline. Of course, preliminary data are very important. It's not, so R&D is not an exploratory grant. It's really, they want you to tell them that it's feasible, it's doable, and you're gonna get results at the end. And I would say that you should not neglect any small grants, any like seed grants, they are very important. And of course, ask your mentors, past applicants, front office, they will have crucial advice, precious advice to guide you through this process. I think
Thank you,
I'm done.
Dr. Vincent. That was a fantastic talk. I think we are running short on time. Rania, could you please check, do we have any questions in the chat?
No, we don't have any question, but I do have one question for Dr. Anna. I just wrote it down here. Okay, so how do eligibility criteria differ from applicants based on their current location or institutional affiliation? For example, if someone recently moved to a new country, so yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so typically I would say that if someone recently moved to a new country, that's actually a great time to look for mobility opportunities. It is sometimes possible to apply before you move, but a lot of times, you need the position first. You need to have a project in mind, and a lot of times it's beneficial to have a PI already collaborating with you on that to develop your application. So most of the time, you have a window of maybe even up to a year that you're still considered mobile. And so in my case, for example, I had, in both cases, when I went to Germany and Norway, I already had the position, some source of funding already. But I was developing that proposal with a PI, and in one of the cases I had already been there for maybe 4 months when I submitted the application, but I was still considered kind of like moving to that place. So typically, I would say probably it's more common than not to already be in the location where you're applying for the mobility grant.
Yeah, this was something for me when I applied for EMBO fellowship. I applied even before moving to US. So I had the position. I knew I would be funded by my PI, but I applied before moving and got the interview before moving, and then I was awarded a few months after starting my position in Baltimore. So
I think a lot of times the PI might say something like, yes, I'm willing to fund you for 1 year, for 2 years,
yeah.
As you sort of try and get funding during that period. So it's probably common to have some source of funding, but maybe not for like a full postdoc period. And the expectation is that you would try to get funding yourself.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. So we cannot take more questions. If anyone have any question, they can just directly write to the speakers. They have their emails on their presentations. On behalf of AROD Committee, I would just like to sincerely thank our speakers, Dr. Aina Chambers and Dr. Philippe Vincent. And thank you everyone for joining us and participating in today's discussion. And we also look forward to seeing you all in the next coffee hour we are hosting in December, on December 22nd. Until then, thank you again and have a wonderful day.
Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much.
much. Thank you so
Bye.
much, doctors, and thank you for our audience. Thank you.